I am delighted to introduce to you Mr. Bennett Kubischta. He is a 1970 graduate of the North Dakota State College of Science. He worked for the North Dakota Department of Transportation for 44 years until his retirement in 2014. He spent his first 3 summers with the department on construction surveying. Ben coordinated the Transportation Enhancement Program, coordinating bicycle pedestrian projects, landscaping projects, NDDOT's Rest Area Reconstruction Program, and the State Scenic Byway Program. Ben also managed tourism-related projects such as the Pembina State Museum, Missouri Yellowstone Confluence Center, the Midland Continental Railroad, Peggy Lee Museum, and Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, and the Sitting Bull Visiting Center. He was also involved with the Prairie Public Broadcasting's program Rivers, Roads, Rails, and Air, and the Old Red Trail projects. So Ben's career culminated with the publication of North Dakota Department of Transportation Roads of Progress, which was an update of the history of the North Dakota Department of Transportation. Today, he's going to speak to us on the 1935 Bismarck baseball team. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. I believe this is North Dakota's greatest athletics team ever. Today we're going to, there's like 4 points in this story I'm going to be telling you. One is about the Bismarck Municipal Ballpark where our Marauders play baseball. Number 2 is about racism in North Dakota in the early 20th century. Number 3 is about people who are involved with this team. And number 4, we're going to be reenacting some of that championship game. I want you to read these books. If you have any interest in sports history, North Dakota sports history, or just baseball in general, both of these books are very good reads. Tom Dunkel's 2013 book, Colorblind, is probably the best one in telling the story. And maybe I'll pitch forever. I first read that book in the late 1960s when I was in high school. Neil Churchill is the hero of this story. He was a Bismarck businessman and mayor. In 1919, he arrives in Bismarck and becomes a salesman at the Lar Motor Company, which that building still exists today. He goes to work for Sam Corwin. In around 1920-21, Sam Corwin offers him a partnership in the auto dealership. He becomes Corwin Churchill. That business name is still here in town today. And in 1939 to 1946, he was the mayor of Bismarck. Churchill was a sportsman and a gambler. In this photo here, he's the 7th from the left. This is a 1926 baseball team where he was the player and manager on that team. He also managed, to be like a general manager, the Bismarck Phantoms basketball team for about 25 years. He did a lot of betting and card playing, and he bet on sports teams, including his own. The rules were a little different back in 90 years ago. We're working now towards the municipal ballpark. Baseball was played on the Capitol grounds from 1916 to 1921. One of the first games was against the All-American girls team. In the 1910s, there were barnstorming teams of women. Some of them had women playing all 9 positions, and some of them had them playing just 7 with a man at third base or catcher. Because the Liberty Memorial Building, where the State Library today was built, the State Historical Society was in there, and the superintendent said, I need your ballpark land for a park where I'm going to put Teddy Roosevelt's cabin. So the ballpark had to be moved. Sites were evaluated, one somewhere in eastern Bismarck, and then this one south of the tracks where we still play today. There were a grandstand and fences at that time, so they were dismantled, and volunteers came and helped move that down to the current location. This is a municipal ballpark in 1954. The very first game played at here was against Wilton on May 22nd, 1921. Bismarck wins that game 9-1. In 1928, the Bismarck Park District takes ownership of the ballpark. And that's something that's happened throughout the decades here in Bismarck, where some private entities have built something, and then the Park District has taken ownership of it shortly after. In 1957, this is an aerial photo. The ballpark was rebuilt in 1950. Tower lights were installed at that same time. We had National Junior Legion tournaments. And Roger Higgins, some of you guys might remember him here. He was a baseball player. He came to Bismarck. He played for the Bismarck Barons in the mid-1950s. He goes to KFOR television as a sports guy. He's one of the early and maybe the most beloved of all the voices of the Marauders. And he was also, I believe, Mary's first baseball coach. In the upper left-hand corner of this photo, you see a railroad underpass right up there. There was nothing on Washington Street. That underpass was built in 1922 to get traffic out to the Liberty Memorial Bridge. Well, in 1990, we needed to build the Washington Street underpass. And that required realignment of the ballpark. Instead of the home plate got shifted from the northeast corner to the southwest. 92, the ballpark opened. It was renovated in 2014. And I believe the last of the tower lights, you can see those down here. They were removed about 3 or so years ago. And for me, that was painful, even though I knew it had to be done. They were getting old, 70 years old. But it was the last tie to one of those early American ballparks. Those tower lights were steel towers. And I knew they had to go, but it hurt a little bit when they did. Now we're going to get into some racial items here in North Dakota. And you will hear objectionable words and see some objectionable images throughout this presentation. North Dakota's original highway sign was an image of Marcellus Red Tomahawk, a good man. There's no doubt in my mind he was a good man. He was the guy when the Indian police were sent out to arrest Sitting Bull in 1890 in December. He was the guy that is credited with killing Sitting Bull. And the Highway Department selects his image in 1923, and in December 28th, I found this quote in the Bismarck Tribune. He was selected because he made the road safe for the white man to travel. The Ku Klux Klan in North Dakota. Anybody familiar with that? Some, yeah. And we don't get taught it in high school. I don't know if anybody's teaching it in college, but the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was a dominant political force in the United States. And Bismarck was just as, or North Dakota was just as strong Klan as any other place, Indiana, the South. 1926, candidates endorsed by the Klan swept most of the offices in Grand Forks. Bismarck's conclave was in June of 26, and one of the speakers was John Hulting, the mayor of Grand Forks, who just won, and his speech was titled, "How We Do It in Grand Forks." So he was going to tell the guys in Bismarck how to keep those people who weren't Saxon white people under control. Conclave in Fargo, they had a parade, large cross told by an airplane. But the most, to me, one of the most telling moments about that era was the speaker from Aberdeen, John Jeffrey, and he's talking about why the Saxons need to control these people coming into the United States. We take our medicine out there, made them reproduce more, they're coming to the United States, and he said these alien mongrel hordes are bringing into our country crime and filth, and we have a right to resent this and to contend against it. Now, those are words that we've probably heard in this country from back in the 1800s when we were against the Irish coming in, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and all the way up to today. Arabelle Thompson is a North Dakota Rough Rider Hall of Fame person for her business with Ebony Magazine. She was editor there. She lived in North Dakota from 14 to 31, about age 7. Some of her family came here. They were at Driscoll first, then Bismarck and Mandan. When she was little and they went to school out in the Driscoll area, in this biography written by Kathy Rickman Anderson, her and her cousins were called skunks. And that was because her uncle, a black man, had married a white Irish woman. And like many other states in the United States, North Dakota had a, I think it's miscegenation law prohibiting black people from marrying white people and white people from marrying black people. That was passed in 1909. It never got repealed until the early 1950s. And there was a 10-year prison term. If you married a black person, or if a black person married you, both of you could go to prison for 10 years. Arabelle had a good, really a mixed time here in Bismarck, but overall it was good. And she said people in North Dakota are afraid of what they are not familiar with. And that's probably true with people all over. The Spriggs brothers, their grandmother was the servant at Fort Abraham Lincoln in the Custer House. Second from the left on this photo here is Eddie Spriggs. He and Johnny were great athletes in Bismarck, and as well as Arabelle, who was a track star in both Bismarck High School and the University of North Dakota. And, you know, I don't have any proof for this bottom statement here, but I think it could be somewhat true where sports stars such as Arabelle Thompson and the Spriggs brothers likely helped the local acceptance of the black baseball players Neil Churchill brought to Bismarck. I found just a little bit about Johnny. Eddie was in the Bismarck area off and on up until about 38 or 39. This guy, John Bud Fowler, was the first black player to play with white professional teams. He played with several different ones. This picture is from Keokuk, Iowa in 1885. He's standing in the middle in the back. Kind of a small, man of stature, kind of small. He finally gets inducted into Major League Baseball Hall of Fame in 2022. Now the next guy, he's a guy that stopped this integration from the 1880s. Adrian Cap Anson. He's a great ball player and a manager, but he was a racist. And as manager of the Chicago White Stockings, who at that became the Chicago Cubs, he would refuse to play teams with black players. And eventually that led to blacks being prohibited from playing in the major leagues because the Chicago Cubs, the White Stockings, were one of the professional major league teams at that time. So Cap Anson was a guy that really stopped black players from playing major league ball. He gets inducted into the Hall of Fame of 39. It took Bud Fowler another 83 years before he could get into the Hall of Fame. Roosevelt Davis was the first black player signed by Neil Churchill in June 1933. He had played with the Pittsburgh Crawfords, with Paige, Cool Papa Bell, and Josh Gibson. A story I like about Cool Papa Bell was he was one of the fastest guys to play baseball. And the story goes he was so fast so that if he turned the light off on the wall, he'd be under the covers before the room got dark. That's how fast Cool Papa was. There were integrated teams in North Dakota and northern Minnesota as early as 31, and maybe even before, because I did find a reference in the Bismarck Tribune about Turtle Lake, North Dakota, which is kind of straight north of here, maybe 70 miles or so. Turtle Lake this year is hiring a famous colored battery from St. Louis, and the Dusky Duel will not arrive before May 20th. So a battery in baseball is a pitcher and a catcher. And I looked a little, not too deeply, but I could not find any references if those two ball players showed up. If there's anybody that really lived Benedictine values on those baseball teams, I would say it'd be Quincy Troop. He comes to Bismarck in the summer of 33. I think he was the second player here. He plays here for 4 years. He would play ball with the kids in town on off days or after the games. He'd help them break in their gloves. He was so well liked in Bismarck that they had a special night for him on August 30th, 1933, Quincy Troop Night, where they gave him a traveling bag. So he probably was the most liked person on that, of the black players, maybe, and the whole team, there's no doubt, the whole team. Quincy Troop was a guy that was liked the best. And he had skills to where he could talk to people about difficult situations. And Neil Churchill asked that because Satchel Paige was doing Satchel Paige things, going to saloons out in the strip between Bismarck and Mandan, and just having fun. And Churchill asked Troop to talk to Paige and said, just tell him to be careful about riding white girls around in broad daylight. You know, Bismarck was accepting the baseball players, but you better not mess around with our white women. Some of the white players, Joe Desiderato, Abe Saperstein, the Harlem Globetrotters guy, had the barnstorming baseball team, was called the All Nations team, and this team was made up of like Japanese, Native Americans, Italians, Desiderato, and other people that probably weren't the typical white Saxon person here in the United States, and that Abe brings his team here to Bismarck to play one of Churchill's teams. Joe was a good fielder, good hitter, and he joins the baseball team next year in 1934 and stays through 1936. And the stats you see at the bottom of the slide, those are the stats for each player from the 1935 National Baseball Congress Championship in Wichita, Kansas, that we'll be getting to here shortly. Abe Saperstein, originator of the Harlem Globetrotters, he and Neil Churchill were good buddies, probably because they were both wheeler dealers. In 1933, one of our great rivals at that time was Jamestown. If you could beat Jamestown, that was the best game throughout the whole year, and Jamestown wanted to beat Bismarck all the time. Jamestown had black players, as well as Valley City, so they had black players too. And Jamestown had some really great pitchers. One of them was Barney Brown, the black pitcher. Churchill asked Saperstein, he needs the greatest colored pitcher in baseball today. Saperstein says, your man is Satchel Paige, but I don't think you can land him. Neil Churchill could always find the money to get the best players available. So money talks, he gets Satchel Paige to come up here. Satchel Paige, he was a teller of tales. Some were true but enhanced, and many were probably questionable. Flamboyant guy. In the book, Maybe I'll Pitch Forever, he claims that the Standing Rock Sioux gave him rattlesnake oil that he used on his arm to keep it young. And he also said that he told the folks from Standing Rock that I'll keep it a secret until I die. Was it true or not? I don't know. It could be. It's a great story. But sometimes native plants and animals give you probably the best healing and recuperative items. When Bismarck wins the National Baseball Congress Championship, the first one in 1935, the Wichita Eagle sports editor writes this, begins his column of that championship game with, North Dakota can today claim the country's semi-pro baseball championship. Bismarck, capital of the state, can build a monument to Leroy Satchel Paige, elongated, skinny, gangling, and gawky pride of the colored race. So even when he was writing that story, he had to caricature Satchel. And today there is a movement in Bismarck community to build that statue. So that's fundraiser is underway. Here's Moose Johnson. There aren't many pictures taken of that team, and the only one people really have found was that very first one we started out with. And a lot of comments in that picture about Vernon Moose Johnson having his hand on Satchel Paige's shoulder, which led to a lot of thoughts that Moose really thought highly of Satchel, and he was welcomed onto the team. Moose Johnson, Churchill gets him from a Iowa single A team where he hit 24 home runs and 235 at bats, so he's a power hitter. He had speed to get triples. He was an outfielder. But he was addicted to alcohol. And we all know people who have an alcoholic addiction. It's tough. It's hard, and we give them high honor and praise when they can become sober with us. He was thought of so highly that in 2022, the Upper Michigan Peninsula elected him into their Sports Hall of Fame. And his National Baseball Congress stats, he batted .321, scored 6 runs, drove in 8 runs. He had 1 double, 3 triples, and 1 home run. And that home run went over the tower lights in deep right field at the Dumont Stadium. Double Duty Radcliffe. He was given the nickname Double Duty because the story goes he caught one game maybe against Satchel Paige, he caught one game that Satchel Paige pitched, and then he pitched the other game. There's no doubt that he was a good catcher and a good pitcher, but just the other day I found this, Thomas Kern, Society for the American Baseball Research, wrote, there is no evidence that he got his nickname from a doubleheader where he caught Satchel Paige in one game and pitched the other. And evidently the name Double Duty was not too uncommon because there was a lot of ball players that played more than one position. And what can we, as the University of Mary, do to honor not only Double Duty, but also the black players that came to Bismarck and played baseball for us? and I just came up with these ideas a few years ago. We're going to be playing Jamestown again next year in baseball. So why can't we have a double duty game in one of our double headers, or have a traveling trophy, the double duty trophy? And pretty soon, we'll have this air-supported rectangle on campus where our softball team can play real games, not like the ones we got to play up in Minot in a shortened place, but we can play real games here on campus. So in February's, why can't we have on campus here Black History Month games where we recognize, again, our players from Bismarck, they played in Jamestown and Valley City, and those folks who played baseball here in North Dakota. 3 more players on the 35 team. Al Leary comes from Montana. He was here for 35 and 36 seasons. Red Haley. His skin was so light that people told him, tell the other folks that you're a Cuban. Because Cubans could get into play professional baseball. I don't know if he did that or how much he did it, but he comes to Bismarck and he plays here 4 years. Dan Oberholzer was an engineering student in Illinois where he grew up, but he was a really good baseball player too. He leaves there, a team he was playing for there, and comes to play for Neil Churchill, where he played in 33 and 35 seasons. Chet Brewer, Kansas City Monarch. He played in Crookston in 1931 and said that was one of the great experiences of his life, playing with those white fellas up in Crookston, Minnesota. But there's a game the Kansas City Monarchs played against Bismarck in Winnipeg where Brewer and Paige went against it, each another. They pitched 9 shutout innings. The 2 pitchers combined for 30 total strikeouts, and it was called because of darkness. And I think about that, and the greatest baseball game ever pitched in Major League history to me is the San Francisco Giants and Milwaukee Braves in San Francisco in the 1960s, where Warren Spahn of the Braves, Juan Marichal of the Giants pitched 16 scoreless innings, and the game was finally won when my only sports hero I ever had, Willie Mays, hits a home run to win the game. But as Churchill was heading his team towards Wichita, Kansas in August of 35, he wanted to have another good pitcher, even though he had 2 really great ones, Hilton Smith and Barney Morris. He makes a deal with the Kansas City Monarchs to have Brewer on his team. Tom Dunkel never talked about how much money Churchill had to pay the Monarchs, but I'm sure he had to pay him something. Hilton Smith was a pitcher with Bismarck in 35 and 36, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame in 2001. And if you go look at his Hall of Fame story, you will find ball players, black and white, that said Hilton Smith was equal to or better than Satchel Paige. Bismarck goes back to the National Baseball Congress in 36. They don't have as many stars as they had in 35. Hilton Smith wins 4 games. Bismarck is playing in the semifinal game. Churchill holds Smith out, and we lose, and we're out of that tournament. But Hilton Smith was a great pitcher. One of Bismarck's greatest sports fans ever, because if you got baseball games, you got to have fans in the seat to cheer on the team. And this was Alma Sundquist. She worked for one of Bismarck's great department stores, the A.W. Lucas Company, which was in business from 1899 to about 1980 or 81. She listened to ball games on the radio. She probably went to basketball, football. She never married. In 1935, the Lucas store gave her the first season ticket for the Bismarck team, so she had the best seat for that great 1935 team. And in 1959, she received a baseball with the signatures of all the American League umpires. A very unusual trophy that if anybody finds that ball is probably worth many thousands of dollars. What happened to it after Elma died in 1959? Somebody might know. So now we're heading towards the National Baseball Congress in August 1935. Hap Dumont, a businessman in Wichita, he develops this baseball field. This is probably not the original picture. I don't know the date, but it's pretty close. And he tells the Wichita people, I'm going to do this national tournament in 35. We're going to bring state champions and really good teams to Wichita and play this tournament. It begins in 35. He's lucky he's got this Bismarck team there because that really was, and Satchel Paige was the guy they wrote about throughout the whole tournament, and the crowds came to see him. That tournament continued on, and it is still operating to this day. There were 32 teams there. 27 were white, which included white people, Japanese, and Native American ancestries. 5 colored teams. Bismarck was classified as a colored team because they had black players on their team. Okay, it was a double elimination tournament, and these are the scores of Bismarck's first 6 games. The 1 second from the bottom there, Duncan, Oklahoma, that was probably one of the teams that was favored to win the championship. Bismarck, Satchel Paige pitches that game, and Bismarck wins 3-1. And on the day of that big game, Duncan wins their other games, and they end up in the championship game against Bismarck on August 25th. And on the day of that game, this is what the Wichita Eagle printed because they're trying to show how great Satchel Paige was. And you look at this and you see racist images. You see great American athletes being portrayed as monkeys or as apes. On the right side from top to bottom was Jesse Owens. How fast is a Satchel Paige fastball? Combine the speed of Jesse Owens with the hop of Euless Peacock, who was a great track star in the 1930s. He even beat Jesse Owens in races. The dynamite and the Joe Louis punch, and that's the Satchel Paige delivery. So this picture, I found this in several other newspapers. The southeastern states didn't carry this at all, but like Wichita, Kansas, north, a little bit east, a little bit west, this image shows up. It shows up in the Bismarck Tribune on the 28th of August 35 after Bismarck had won the tournament, and its title's a little different about how the championship was won. Bismarck team wins the championship. Satchel helps out. Okay, we're going to go to the game. We got a few minutes left here. We're going to speed through this pretty fast. But the State Recreation Parlor, which was a pool hall and a beer hall in downtown Bismarck, probably was our first sports bar. The plays came in over the wire, and this guy, Dayton Shipley, would read the plays play-by-play from the Western Union Wire for the first 6 games. The 7th game was set up to finally make a radio connection from Kansas somewheres and then to Bismarck to one of our radio stations, and that was, you could hear the game by radio at that time. But we're going to go to the saloon. We're going to listen to the first, second, seventh, eighth, and ninth innings. And women beware, because when you go into the saloon with us, there's going to be cussing, cigar smoking, tobacco spitting men you're going to encounter. So keep silent, cheer on the team. First inning, the lineup for Bismarck was Oberholzer at second, Leary at short, Troop at center. Hilton Smith is in right field, Haley at first base, Radcliffe at catcher, Hancock left field, Desiderado third base, Paige is pitching. Who's missing? Our power hitter is not in the lineup. Moose Johnson gets drunk the night before and comes to the ballpark so drunk and hung over that Churchill can't put him in the lineup. Now, did he get drunk on his own, or did some people who were betting against Bismarck get him drunk? Nobody has an answer to that. So we're in the first inning. Duncan's up first. Lowell singles to left. Hawley falls out to Desiderado. Sam triples to center field, scoring Lowell. Haley to Page, ground out. Duncan's got to be happy. They got a lead, a runoff of Page in the first inning, so we're sitting pretty good, they believe. In the bottom of the first, Bismarck comes up. Oberholzer flies out to center field. Leary hits a fly ball to the right fielder who makes a beautiful catch for the second out of the inning. So we got 2 out. Quincy Troop is coming up. Hits a fly ball to right field, deep right field. It lands. It's rolling. Troop round second. He's heading for third. Going to have an easy triple. The outfielders raise up their hands. The ball rolls underneath the scoreboard. Troop is called back to second as a double. Next man up is Hilton Smith, who's playing for Moose. Smith singles to center, ties up the game as Troop scores. Haley lines out to center field. The second inning, the important thing about the second inning, there was no score in the second inning. But this ballpark had grandstands and then seating down the first and third base line. But there was no fence separating the fans from the ball field. So in the bottom of the second inning, the umpires called time to get the crowd back from the baselines. They were just kind of getting closer and closer. No, we can't have that. The second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, both pitchers were in complete control of the game. Nobody had any potential for scoring. There were sacrifices to get men over to second and scoring position, but that never happened. But in the seventh inning, Bismarck breaks through in the bottom of the seventh. Red Haley singles to center. Hancock sacrifices Haley to second because Neil Churchill knew his pitcher was so good that if we can get just one run, we can win this game. Double duty, Radcliffe walks. Desiderado singles to right field, scoring Haley. Radcliffe going to third. And the throw comes to the plate. How many times do you see a throw from the outfield coming to home with no chance to get the runner, and the batter advances from first to second? And that's what happened here. And who comes up? The last man in the lineup, Satchel Paige. He had one hit. He was really a poor batter in his whole life, but wouldn't you know it, he gets a single to right field, to center field. Radcliffe and Desiderado scores. Paige, some of the stories goes, he deliberately stops between second and first to decoy himself to get the outfielders to throw the ball. So he gets thrown out at second. Oberholzer grounds out. Bismarck gets 3 runs, and now we're ahead 4-1, and we're heading into the 8th inning. The 8th inning, Duncan gets the leadoff single, then there's a strikeout, a fly out, and a grounder to shortstop. We had a force at second. You're always looking for some insurance runs. The best kind of insurance ever is when your baseball team can score some extra runs in the bottom of the 8th inning, because you never know what's going to happen in that last inning. Leary comes up, he grounds out to pitcher. Quincy Troop, grounded out from first to the pitcher. The pitcher came over, and first baseman tosses the ball to him. Smith singles to right field. Red Haley singles to center, and Smith must have been running on the crack of the bat, and he gets to third. Then there's a pass ball, and Smith scores. The 9th inning was not uneventful. Bismarck was starting to sweat. The leadoff batter pops out. Then there's 3 consecutive hits. Duncan scores a run that is 5-2. The tying runs are on first and second with only 1 out. And Satchel Paige does what Satchel Paige does best. When it's time to strike out the batters, he strikes out the next 2 batters, and the game is over, and Bismarck are the champions. I'm using this phrase, the post-game wrap, because my announcers on the San Francisco Giants, that's what they call their discussion after the Giants baseball game. Fans stormed the field. They wanted to get Satchel Paige's autograph. Neil Churchill was having trouble getting things collected out of the dugout. The people were probably taking souvenirs. In the dressing room, the players were celebrating together. It took Paige 30 minutes to get through the crowd. And the Eagle interviewed Churchill in the dressing room, and Paige. Churchill said he was really nervous at the start of the game because Moose wasn't there. And Paige, in one of his unusual, humble times in his life, said, "Just want to say our boys played a great game, and don't go talking a lot about me." Okay, this is our final slide. This picture I found in the Fargo Forum. It was August 31st, 1935. I asked the State Historical Society here, Sarah Walker, if they had this, if I could get a better image. And Sarah said, we do not have that edition of the Forum here. Maybe it was an afternoon one. So I started looking for this picture also in different newspapers across the country. I could not find it. It was an Associated Press photo, because AP shows up in the bottom right-hand corner. AP photos get sent out on the wire. Only the Fargo Forum chose to print this picture. The Bismarck Tribune, who must have got a copy of it, did not. And last week, when Paige Gilmore was interviewing me for a little story about on KX, the statue project for Satchel, I was showing her my images I was going to use in this presentation. And when we got to this one, I knew this was an important photo, but when Paige and I were visiting, it struck me how important this photo is, because the night before, an integrated football team, the Philadelphia Eagles, celebrated winning the Super Bowl football game. This picture is probably the first picture ever of an integrated team winning a championship. And once again, Neil Churchill is the hero of this story, and he was. I mean, okay, so this ball player thanks you. Questions? We're getting short in time. We got 5 minutes. I will be outside. I will take every question from every person I want to be like Satchel Paige and linger for at least 30 minutes or more after the game.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned earlier in the presentation how, like, the KKK had a strong influence in North Dakota politics. When we had the integrated team, like, what was the pushback like in Bismarck? Was there pushback? I'm assuming that there was. And how did their success affect local culture and politics?
There was a pushback. I did not find any evidence how detailed it was, but there was a guy that was working in the Corin Churchill shop for Neil Churchill, and Neil had some of his black players working there, and this white guy did not like it. Churchill fired him. And I would think that these black players that played here in North Dakota and Minnesota really set the tone for good, more accepting relations amongst people here in our state. And then they disappeared, the 1950s come along, and we forget about them.